Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Engineering Politics Podcast. Today is the first part of another long conversation I had with Truman from Return to Reason. We continue our discussion on the shifting hierarchy at large in America, and therefore around the world today. Because this conversation was so long, almost 4 hours to be exact, we decided to split it up into two different podcasts. This will be Engineering Politics Podcast number 20 and 21. But if you want a good foundation for this discussion, since this is a topic we've expanded on in several podcasts already, listen to the Engineering Politics Podcasts number 17, 18, and 19 to get caught up on our last conversation. And because it's a long podcast, there will be no bonus content at the end. But I would still appreciate you joining and subscribing to the Engineering Politics Locals community. You can go to engineeringpolitics.locals.com and become a member for free, or get the subscriber pass for as little as $2 per month. And you can use promo code EPFREE for a 3-month free trial of the subscription pass. That's spelled EPFREE. I'll go over more of where you can find me and support this content after the show. Also, make sure to show some support for Truman from Return to Reason. You can find Truman and his locals community at returntoreason.locals.com. If you like the Engineering Politics Locals community, you'll love the Return to Reason Locals community too. So go check them out. All right, let's get this started. This is the Engineering Politics Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Good to see you. Kevin and I are back again talking about hierarchies, the fact that they're corrupted, and other esoteric nonsense that's actually super duper important. So for those of you that have watched the last several conversations we've had in the different parts, this is kind of where we want to bring it to the contemporary, bring it to right now. We'll do a little bit of what would you say, review to try and bring you up to speed for those of you that have forgotten or just not joining. But whenever we post this, we'll include links to the past conversations that have kind of set the stage for all of this. But Kevin, if you're going to kind of give just a quick refresher for people in terms of kind of what we have discussed and what we're talking about and why it's important. So basically, if you were to summarize, 6 or 7 hours worth of content in a really concise, and
in one sentence,
precisely in one sentence. Yeah. Everything is evil and racist. Boom. Did it. You're welcome. Anyway, but if you're to do that, yeah. Well, what do you got?
Yeah. So what I think we accomplished in our last long conversation that's broken down into 3 different parts. The first part was, why are we doing this? Why do we feel the need to do this? And I think it's pretty clear is when it starts to get into some of these systems of education and starts to be taught as like fact, that becomes a problem because now the thing that was out there not affecting me, but, I'm a good little liberal and I'm going to allow it to happen because I believe people should be able to have their own ideas. That's fine, but it's going to start to really hop up on me. And then when it goes into school and teaches my kids some of this stuff, that's where I'm going to draw the line. So that's kind of where we started. But the meat of that conversation really came in what were the past examples of corrupt hierarchies. And so we hit on 2 and expanded on those quite a bit in our second part of our last conversation, where we went into the Rhode Island hospital example where, when you're cutting off feedback between nurses to doctors, especially during certain procedures, you start to have all these mistakes. The hierarchical value in a hospital is to protect people. That is the objective of the hierarchy. And when you start to see that hierarchy become corrupted because it's almost more important to stroke the doctor's ego than it is to actually go for the claimed objective of helping people, and that doctor starts to shut down feedback from the nurses, you see all these problems. You see them miss that end goal. And that's when the hierarchy has become corrupted. So I think that was an excellent example of what happens when you shut off communication, you shut off that feedback that is vital to the objective of that hierarchy. Just to know that it's not just the top of the hierarchy, just the head of the hierarchy that does all these things, that relies on the whole system to generate a feedback loop to make sure that hierarchy keeps moving toward the stated objective, which in that case, again, is helping people. The other one we did is a bit more clear and obvious is the Jim Crow South, that you had people making laws and passing different things to preserve the hierarchy that already came before it, I suppose. When you have slavery, a lot of the people down there wanted to maintain it. And when you get rid of slavery, you've now destroyed the hierarchy that used to be there. And some of the people in the South were very, very uncomfortable with that. So they wanted to reinforce and rebuild the hierarchy they saw before. And they did that through legislation. They did that through, not making these overt policies that said, you are slaves, you are less than us. It was making policies saying, okay, if you want to vote, you need to take a certain test on probably some sort of educational background that you don't have because you'd never had the opportunity prior. And then they see, okay, some whites don't have this education, so now we're going to do the grandfather, type of idea where it's like if your grandfather could vote, then you could vote. Obviously, none of the blacks who had their grandfathers are able to vote. They're all slaves, so it's a really good way for them to get around it and then, again, reinforce the corrupt hierarchy. So the Jim Crow South was an awesome example of, an unfortunate example, but an awesome in illuminating what a corrupt hierarchy looks like in the past. And
can I interject really fast on the Jim Crow one, so that I want to make a distinction. Mm-hmm. Whenever we first defined hierarchies, we discussed that hierarchies come about naturally to achieve a goal. And whenever we say that the hierarchy that was destroyed after the Civil War was the hierarchy of power between slaves and their masters, and that was not a hierarchy that was a natural, productive hierarchy. What was the hierarchy that was corrupted was just the government system in general, where they implemented those voter suppression, the Jim Crow laws, and things like that. So I just want to make a quick distinction that you weren't saying there is a super productive natural hierarchy when it comes to slaves and masters. And then
the claimed objective of the hierarchy is progression of progress. Yep. It's the same thing as their kind of version of capitalism. It was to lift all boats, and they believed that the best way to do it was to keep the white man superior. And you could see that the objective behind the hierarchy was not to bring all this prosperity, but was to maintain that the white man over the black man, and superiority was really the intention.
So that was the stroking the egos and everything like that. So the hierarchy that existed, that is a good and natural one, is just government generally. That's law enforcement. That's, having a judicial system that actually functions, things like that. Not that
would be in conflict right now, but yes, generally.
Right. Okay. Sorry. I just wanted to make that distinction there.
Yeah. And then through that, we started to get into, how do the dynamics that were at play in those two instances translate to what we're seeing today? And through that, the first thing we needed to establish, and we started to get into, and what we'll get into more at the beginning of our conversation today, is what happened within what we would consider the American left. The liberals used to be on top of the ideological hierarchy within the left. That was kind of the you call them Democrats, you call them liberals. It's their main ideology was to bring liberty. Individual liberty was very important to them. But now we've seen a switch, and it was very, very fast. It happened progressively over time, but you really saw something catalyze that switch recently, that now individual liberty is not on the top of the hierarchy even a little bit. Now you see this in progressivism. You see this in, shutting down debate even within the left. And I was starting to allude to what catalyzed that change. Why did it happen? What caused it? And that's really where we left off the last conversation. And we're starting to go into this one.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. That was actually a really good summary. Challenge accepted, man.
One sentence.
Yeah. I mean, it's a run-on sentence. Yeah. You could put a semicolon somewhere in there, maybe where
maybe a couple of them.
Yeah. So I think this is an interesting conversation, this part for you and I to have, because I come, originally from the left, and my understanding is that you've kind of always been a conservative, always on the right. So I think we probably have two different perspectives on what the left was, what it is, where it's going. We probably don't have different opinions on where it's going. But I would like to, let's spend a little bit of time unpacking kind of how you historically view the left in terms of, from an ideological standpoint, like what are the distinctions as you see them between, your belief structure as a conservative, kind of in the classical sense, and the more understood sense, and what the belief structure ideology is of the left, again, kind of in the more understood sense, not in the way that it is right now. Does that make sense? So how do you see those two different ideologies?
Yeah, so the left, how I would categorize them really throughout their history, and I'm not going to dive into the origins of slavery and stuff like that. I want to really give the left more credit than just saying the Democrat was here, because really the left and right, it's not Democrat and Republican. It can change. It's more of a mode of thinking and a collection of ideologies. And what we've seen from the left when we go into classical liberalism is believing in individual liberty. And that kind of manifests itself naturally in saying, you know what, we believe in rights for gay people, rights for women, because that's liberty. That's allowing them to live their lives as they see fit. But the traditional classical liberalism is like, well, obviously, we're not going to believe in absolute liberty where you're allowed to kill other people just because that's part of your belief. That belief, your actions stop at the liberty of other people. You're not allowed to infringe on other people's liberties. And that's what we see with the classical liberalism that we hear about from people like Dave Rubin and a lot of people who we used to be on the left, but now are moving more rightward. And I think that's because of just the natural ideology within conservatism, or the right, is to conserve traditions is really the big thing. So conservatism really will float to cover different ideologies, I guess. You see kind of a lot of conservative libertarians, we call them, because we're conserving libertarianism, which is honestly now really almost the same thing as classical liberalism, at least a little closer. But it is naturally to conserve certain ideologies and traditions that we just try to move past. So it naturally just, again, conserves something. And I feel like I'm just repeating myself, but yeah, the way we normally see the left is, again, liberty, to preserve individual liberty and individual rights.
Okay. Yeah, I think in my video about whenever I said why I'm not a Republican, I called myself a conservatarian, where I think I probably always had to some degree conservative values, but I don't want them legislated. I think that the right made a lot of mistakes in trying to legislate their values, and now you have a different group trying to legislate their values, and we'll get into how that's going. So the way that I always because what made me think of this is whenever we were speaking, I think it was the other day, 2 days ago or something like that, we were talking a little bit about this, about the natural progression of the left that kind of brought them to where we are now and what we're observing. And you had asked the question, and we've talked about this, and this is something that Dave Rubin's talked about, that lots of people talked about, is this the natural conclusion to liberalism, to the left, or some people say it's a virus or a parasite that got inserted into liberalism, and others say it's kind of a natural it's a natural logical conclusion. That's what I'm looking for, to the ideology. And whenever we talked last time, or like just you and I, not in a recording, I had said I think there's kind of both, that there is a dissonance, that there's people that don't understand the logical conclusion to certain ideas. Like I never understood. I remember this is probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, having an argument with someone about the necessity of a very strong welfare state. And they were making the argument that, there needs to be these private and, charities and things like that, and religious institutions and so on and so forth. And I remember just laughing in his face and saying, well, I live in reality. That's never going to happen. So, in the meantime, the government needs to do it. And as soon as we have all those other ones in place, then the government can stop doing it. And because I was like, I'm being the pragmatist here, but really it's the opposite, because as long as the government is in place, there's never going to be those, at least a large, robust array of private options, because they have different incentive structures, they have different ways in which they operate. There is a book called The Tragedy of American Compassion that's all about how the rise of government and or government-run charities and government-run like soup kitchens and homeless shelters and stuff like that, where they didn't have any requirements for people to, receive their services, led to the destruction of a lot of private ones that were successful in a lot of ways, but they would cut off services if you weren't actively trying to get your life together. And so my point is that I didn't understand. That's whenever I was a lot more on the left. I thought that I understood, but I didn't understand that the way incentive structures work. I didn't understand the economics of it. I didn't understand the logical conclusion of just, there's natural principles here of competing ideas and competing incentive structures. So for example, if you get to choose between a soup kitchen where you can just show up and get food, or one where you have to go and you have to work and you have to show that you're trying to make your life better, of course you're going to go to the one where you can just show up and get food, which is going to make it where the other one doesn't get as many people, not going to get as much funding. It's going to eventually go out of business, leaving the one that incentivizes, well, at the very least, I don't know what it incentivizes, but it doesn't incentivize you getting your life together.
To be fair, they have awesome pea soup on Wednesdays.
Have awesome pea soup? Like actual pea or like split pea soup?
No, split pea. That's a quote from Creed Bratton from The Office.
Oh, it is?
Did you catch that? Yeah.
Oh, no, I didn't. I was in the San Francisco mindset where, I more readily equate homelessness with human discharge. I don't know if that's right. But
you got to download the app when you go there, I guess, to avoid the fuels.
No, dude, there's Yelp pages for homeless shelters.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, actually. Anyway.
Darn homeless people on their iPhones.
I know, right? I know. No, you should check it out. It's actually it's funny, but also like so insane. But anyway, so the way that I see the left and the right is, and where we can get into the hierarchy shift that changed is, I think that it kind of in a lot of ways boils down to a fundamental difference in understanding of human nature, or, that's what Soul calls the tragic vision versus the enlightened vision. Is that right? Or the anointed
there's
vision.
A constrained vision.
Constrained vision. Yeah, and unconstrained. But he in another book,
there's also the vision of the anointed.
And the benighted. Yeah. There's the anointed and the benighted. Yep. Yeah. But basically one says humans are probably not perfectible. And so they're going to operate, there's always going to be exceptions, but generally speaking, here's the ways in which humans function given certain set of incentives. And then there's the other one that says, no, we can engineer perfection, utopia, and all, vision, that kind of thing. And
that's the idea of the constrained. If we're the constrained vision is we are constrained to our human behavior.
Yep.
And the best thing we can do is incentivize or disincentivize certain behaviors among certain people, where the unconstrained vision is, no, we're a blank slate. Policy will permanently change human behavior in whatever way we want to mold it in. So they're the two extremes, and normally the idea is we live somewhere in both. We're not only biological. We don't evolve on a pure biological level. We also evolve in a theological level. We evolve because we are also extremely social creatures. You can't just take this one-track evolution and say, well, we just change the government system, and that'll automatically change how people interact with each other.
Yep. Yeah, and so to kind of clarify, because I'm in my mind, I'm like, okay, do people have any idea what we're talking about right now and why this matters? So the reason why this matters, and I always have that thought all the time, but the reason why it matters is because when we're talking about how there's two hierarchies, and really it's just two idea sets, and one's generally right, one's generally left, and they've been in competition. Let's say, if we don't want to get into slavery, if we don't get into any of that, let's just say since the turn of the century of the 20th century, and there's been the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and they've represented different values and different philosophies of government. Anytime that the Democrats, the left, has been in charge, it's meant government expansion. Anytime the right has been in charge, it's meant government cutting government spending, or at least it's supposed to anyway.
Up until the 21st century, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Reagan blew out the spending too. People forget about that. But anyway, it was supposed to, it was supposed to represent fiscal responsibility, but hasn't. And so the right was, like you said, more conservative, as, more traditional, represented, traditional family values, right? That's that was the sloganeering that they would use, especially back in like the 90s, where I think they completely crapped the bed and screwed all this up. But and the left has always been more, kind of, let's think outside the box. We're open, that's the openness to experience and so on and so forth. And so those two have kind of existed, and within each of them, there's been extremes, right? Extreme versions of each of those ideologies. And that's where you get into, Brett Weinstein and his wife, Heather, were talking about, like, in a live stream, I think it was sometime within the last week, about how the extreme version of the right is fascism and the extreme version of the left is authoritarian, Marxism. And they're basically the same thing in practice. And so, but the point is that if we acknowledge there's extremes on the right and there's extremes on the left, that's not a question, right? Like, no one goes, well, no, there's no extremes on the right, and now there's people on the left who will say there's no extremes on the left. But the point is that if you say every idea set has an extreme version, the question is, which versions are more accepted within that general structure? So within the right, how accepted are the most far right extreme versions of itself? And within the left, how accepted are the most far left extreme versions of itself? And what we're going to get into is within the left, that they paid a lot more, what would you say? They gave a lot more credibility. They gave a lot more oxygen.
Certainly more lip service, to allow them to express their ideas without pushback.
Yep. And so, and the right, now, and here's where I'm ignorant on this stuff, is I don't know if the right has done that in the past, in terms of, because we hear about like paying lip service to the alt-right or, the white nationalists and stuff like that. I don't know if the right has a history of doing this with their own extreme, with the people on their side that are extreme, the way that the left has. But maybe you can speak to that. I genuinely don't know.
Yeah. I would say a very short window, and I wouldn't be able to speak back to Reagan or times before that. But I would say for a short window of time and around 2015, 2016, leading up to the election, is when the term alt-right first popped up. And when it first popped up, it was so unclearly defined that there were people who are like, yeah, I'm alt-right, but I'm not a racist. Like, I'm an alternative to the Mitch McConnell form of conservatism, right? It's like I'm more of the, I guess, Trump brand. And that's why Trump is labeled as an alt-right, is labeled now associated as a racist, because when alt-right first came, to prominence, and then the face of it is someone like Milo Yiannopoulos, who, when he first hit the scene, his ideas were always provocative, but there was a point to them. And I can say one of my, not political awakening, I always came from the right, but one of the reasons that motivated me to get more involved in politics was Milo Yiannopoulos on Joe Rogan. Like, he was provocative, but he was making sense. And the downfall of Milo was his provocation became his number one goal, and making sense just was on the back burner. And through that, he got himself into hot water, well-deserved. But my point is that alt-right title was more acceptable for a short period of time because it wasn't completely taken over by the Richard Spencers and the people who actually had more sinister beliefs, especially on race. So again, they're allowed to have this lip service a bit more because of the new brand of not conservatism, but right-wing politics and more populism that came with kind of the Steve Bannons and the Donald Trumps that were like, I like Mitt Romney, Like, I agree with his overall demeanor and what he believes in, but I'm so sick of seeing the spineless amoeba go up on stage and just bend to the will of anyone who accuses him of being slightly immoral in one of his beliefs. And rather than standing up for his beliefs, he's just going to bend to their will. Or again, a guy like Mitt Romney, who I think would sell out his own grandmother for a 5-minute spot on CNN just to get some praise from the left. And the people on the right were sick of it. Like, we were sick of these people bending to the will and not standing up for their own principles because they're too scared of being labeled as a racist. And that was kind of the little window the alt-right had to come in there and say, I'm not afraid to say this stuff anymore. I'm like, okay, good. And then leading up to the election is like, Richard Spencer started to pop up and some of these really bad ideas like, okay, you guys are no longer needed. Thank you for maybe a little bit of a confidence boost to get us out of our conservative shell. Like, and I would include me in that conservative shell. I would have considered myself a Chardonnay sipping conservative where I'm above the fray. I don't like the character attacks that Donald Trump has done. But now at least I can appreciate his pushback on people trying to label him as something that he's not, and his willingness to take the media, especially the media, to task, and something we haven't seen in conservative politics in a long time. So to sum up, for a very short window, it was allowed until the mask came off, and then immediately the mass conservative movement's like, no, you're no longer acceptable in the space. So we're going to disassociate ourselves from the alt-right.
Okay. So I just had the thought that maybe it would, because I'm always thinking, is this making sense? Are people going to connect with this? So it might make sense for us to, for at least as we're discussing this particular topic, to just talk about left-wing ideals, left ideals, right ideals, and or the left ideology and right ideology, or what you'd say is more progressive ideology, more conservative ideology. Because really what we're talking about that we've talked about but haven't really explained necessarily yet what we're talking about is the fact that the left and the right spent a long time basically vying for prominence in the national mind, right? So there was a time when we were so think about the 60s and the sexual revolution, think about like LBJ and the Great Society around there. So the left was kind of the top dog at that point in time in terms of the ideas that had gained ascendancy, in terms of who was kind of steering the cultural ship, so to speak. And then that culture, of course, influences politics, as we know. And then the right kind of gains some ascendancy. And we have, I guess that's actually at the beginning of Vietnam a little bit, but, then really going into, Reagan was a Republican, not Reagan, Nixon was a Republican. Yeah. And then after Nixon, we have, was it Carter? Carter came after Nixon. Mm-hmm. Well, it was Ford. Ford was Nixon's, wasn't Ford his VP, right?
VP. Yeah.
And then after Ford was Carter, and then the failure of Carter, he only, did Carter get 2 terms? He did. Yeah, he did. That's how the Department of Education was created. Carter was running for re-election. Anyway, my point is, and then the right gains ascendancy in what that'd be the early 80s is when Reagan's elected. And then you have 12 years of Republicans that are from 82 until, I guess.
Well, 80 to 92.
Was it 80 to 92? Yeah, 80 to 92. That's right.
And then Clinton ran as a Republican, basically, too, in 92. And that's how he won his election. He basically played himself as a Republican. He was a Democrat, but his politics were, he ran as a Republican effectively in 92.
I didn't know that. So I know that he ousted.
Well, he was a Democrat.
Senior.
Again, he is a Democrat, always was a Democrat, but his policies, tough on crime, this kind of stuff, they're rather Republican. And if you look at, they're rather right wing compared to, especially, it's kind of, similar to what Obama did. He wouldn't run as a Republican, but he had much more moderate stances on things in 2008 than he did in 2012. Yeah. 2012, he's just like, screw you. This is what I really think. and that's how he kind of rose to prominence. But I think you kind of see that in both parties whenever someone runs against an 8-year political incumbency. Basically, they have to moderate a little bit to capture some.
That's what Bush did.
Kind of moved.
Yeah, Bush. I mean, that's that compassionate conservatism. So the point is as much as I, probably butchered a lot of those dates, and the point is that the left and the right, there is kind of what you could say a historic pendulum kind of thing, where they're not just in charge, but the way they get in charge is because the culture kind of rallies around what they see them representing. Is that fair to say? And as you pointed out, whenever they're running against an 8-year incumbency, they usually tend to moderate a little bit. So Clinton, as you said, presented himself more on the right, and that's how he was able to beat Bush Sr. Bush had to be a little bit more to the left. We get education, No Child Left Behind, compassionate conservatism, all those other things. In fact, Bush's election was, from my understanding, the first time a Republican presidential candidate, part of their platform wasn't, I'm going to get rid of the Department of Education, because from the very beginning, whenever it was founded, it was unconstitutional. The whole thing is a mess. But he was the first one to say that, no, I'm not going to do that. Actually, we're going to expand what the Department of Education does. But so if we're saying that there is that kind of natural pendulum swing of where the culture is, and as you hinted at in the last video, which is something we've talked about before, something happened, I think, in the 90s. And it seems like you also think maybe something happened in the 90s.
I would say it started in like the 40s, but you really started to see it catalyze in the 90s, I would say.
Yes.
So what we're about to talk about, because of one of the huge government policies, that the New Deal and that type of stuff. And then you have the civil rights movement that, again, started to catalyze this movement a bit more of progressivism. I think you started to see that term even pop up more at that time. And then I think it naturally was trending upward. And then sometime, I would say in the 90s, something catalyzed this movement that shot it way up. And then again, I think recently, probably with it happened before Trump. So you'd have to say somewhere in the 2014, 2015 range is when it shot up again. We had another spike in what I would consider progressivism in this way.
Yep. So what I see happening in the 90s, so whenever you talk about the 40s, when FDR was elected, and I think he was originally elected in 30, 32, something like that.
He had 4 terms. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, you get progressivism then, and even before him with Woodrow Wilson. But so what I'm talking about isn't so much the policy and the politics, but the culture. When I see the last decisive battle for the culture being fought in the 90s is when I see I think when the right took their kind of last gasp of breath and finally just keeled over in terms of it being influential on the culture in a positive way and not being the boogeyman. And so that's what I mean. Yes, you're right. The stage was set for that as we got these incremental expansions of government, which, as I see it, changed how people thought about government and made the next generation enters into a whole new schema for how they conceptualize their relationship with government, the role of government, so on and so forth. But I see it as in the 90s is when the left effectively, if the right and left were playing king of the hill for the moral high ground or for the reins of the culture, that I think that the right was pushed off the hill permanently, somewhere in there in terms of their credibility in the public mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I basically agree with you in the timeline. Yeah, all I was mentioning was seemed like there was a course change within the left politically, starting in those, the early 20th century, and then as projected. But yeah, I think the again, what I would consider the catalyst for this new movement we're seeing now has certainly come then, especially with the less opposition on the right, or the right kind of reforming into getting away from the religious right, where we're pointing fingers at people and saying, don't use naughty words, don't use profane words, don't, do all these things, to someone's like, okay, we need to reform and be a part of the culture rather than just be people criticizing and judging everyone.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. I was listening to that conversation between Sam Harris and Jonathan Haidt they had not that long ago. And Haidt brings up, and again, because I don't know a lot about conservatism or just the history of it outside of what I've researched, I don't know a lot about it experientially, that whenever Reagan came to prominence, that it was about a coalition it was about values, uniting people based on values, not necessarily policy. And I need to do more research before I just say that is definitely what happened there, and it is true. But I could see that being accurate, because then that creates an opposite effect on the left, where it's like, well, we have these values. Now, I would argue that already existed, again, even going back to the sexual revolution in the 60s. But my point is that once you start doing that, you say that we represent, like, what made me think of it is whenever you're saying, they were trying to legislate, again, their morality. So don't say these naughty words, can't violent video games or violent movies. And, there was all these, any book that was maybe a little bit edgy, we'll try and get it out of schools because it's pornography or something like that. And so you're going to get a pushback effect if you're trying to have that. I mean, that's the movie Footloose exists, and it's this town where dancing is illegal. Like, you couldn't make that movie without a context where people would have some buy-in, right? Like,
there needs to be some sort of truth in a movie to make it believable.
Right. And so that's exactly right. And so the point is that people could see that being a real thing, that there are town places where dancing is illegal. And guess what? There were places where dancing is legal. There's dry counties where you couldn't get alcohol. So that's where they're trying to legislate.
Well, to be fair, have you ever seen people dance without alcohol? It's pretty awful.
It is awful. That's right. So yeah, that's right. If you're going to ban one, you should also ban the other at least. So fair enough. But my point is that they were trying to legislate their morality, and they thought that they were going to have this moral majority that was going to, rule and reign forever, basically. And they had a rude awakening whenever it turns out that, most people are not going to be down with that kind of thing. People want freedom, people want liberty, and they're going to push hard against that. So it's not, okay, we're actually going to have dancing, and also we're going to start grinding to this, to music. I remember that was the big thing whenever I was in middle school, people were grinding, that was the dancing there.
Well, I went to Catholic school, so it was like a 2-foot separation minimum you had to put in there.
I'm gonna keep all my jokes are gonna go back. I'll stay inside. Okay.
I feel like I'm hearing them. You don't have to say them. It's fine.
Yep. Anyway, but the point is that there is this massive pushback. And so really to try and put a fine point and, maybe even press reset a little bit here, the thing that we're trying to set up for people is that we have a traditional understanding of the pendulum of back and forth between right and left, between more progressive, more open, more liberal kind of ideals, and more conservative, more reserved, more traditional kind of ideals. And we understand that. And there's a lot of people, I think about people like my dad, who they're kind of older, and they have the way they look at our politics now is they use the same lens that actually would have made sense like 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And they think that what they're seeing now on the left and on the right is the same as what they would have seen, in 1985 or something like that. And so that's my point, is that we have this understanding, but something has shifted. So what we know is the counterculture, which was the left has always represented the counterculture. So that's, have you ever seen the movie Exit Through the Gift Shop?
No.
Okay. Well, so that's a really good movie, kind of about counterculture a little bit. Or there's who's the graffiti guy Banksy, graffiti, and kind of guerrilla art represents counterculture. Anything that's subversive or, taboo sexually represents counterculture. And so there was this perception of the left was the counterculture and the right was the mainstream culture. And that's why presidents had to historically run on, traditional marriage and not, be, for same-sex marriage. They had to say, I'm, for traditional marriage. And Obama would, he said abortion safe, legal, and rare. Right. So they had to pay lip service to some of what would be considered more the mainstream culture and not necessarily to the counterculture. And what we're talking about is that actually the counterculture kind of became the mainstream culture, or at least planted the seeds in the seeds of what we're seeing come to fruition now in the 90s when they shifted. Like it wasn't really the counterculture, because if it was the counterculture, I remember, I think I told you this, I don't remember if it was in an episode, but I remember like when Ellen came out, like how was this big deal? And it was on the cover of like People magazine. It said, I'm gay. Right. And then there's Will and Grace, and we have like Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. I think that the integration of kind of gay culture into the mainstream showed that it wasn't counterculture anymore. It was becoming, the norm. And so there was this understanding of what was the counterculture, but it actually has probably been the culture for quite a while now. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting, and kind of a point that I think you hit on. One of the slogans that irk me is Republicans are never going to win another election again if DC and Puerto Rico get their own senators. Right. There's this idea, and I'm not just saying specifically that idea, but there's always this idea like Republicans won't win another election for 100 years if this thing happens, X happens, or Democrats won't win another election again if this other thing happens. And just the idea of a political party never winning again because there's some sort of shift, to me is silly, because that assumes that those parties are rigid and those platforms aren't going to move to accommodate or to move toward the middle in order to gain more popularity. Like, no matter what happens, no matter what shift happens, even if Texas turns blue, well, guess what? The Republican Party is going to moderate and start to capture more of the general vote. And that's how they get in. And that's how political parties evolve. And that's the evolution of political parties. And the interesting thing we're seeing today, and it's something we'll talk about, is the people driving the bus for the left right now is not as political. You have this group that has taken over the hierarchy, and you can tell that the Democrats the party itself is trying to moderate the best it can without pissing the people off who are driving the bus. And that is why I think you have a flat out rejection of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris by them. That is why they're like, I hate these people. And, the people on the left driving the bus are completely rejecting these people, because it's like the political left is trying to moderate and go toward the middle and not go all crazy and be out and out socialists and say, crime, we're going to ignore crime. So they have someone on the ticket who has a history of, both people on the ticket has a history of, crime bills and pushing back on crime, or being somewhat tough on crime, at least in a PR sense. But you have the new hierarchy of the left rejecting those people because they see them as trying to moderate when they're trying, the actual people within the left are trying to progress. And I think they're pushing back, and that's something that you don't see as much. I mean, you kind of saw it with Trump, about a lot of conservatives pushing back and rejecting Trump. But again, a lot of people like me who didn't vote for Trump in 2016 will probably vote for him in 2020 because I have now kind of shifted my beliefs. But on the other side, you're saying like, no, this political party better shift with my beliefs. I'm not going to moderate with the party. I'm going to keep trending leftward, and now are basically rejecting the people that they put up for the nomination.
Yep. Yes. There's some things you said there that I disagree with about the DC thing. DC has only ever had Democrat mayors. So I think that they would probably, the odds of them, if they became a state, having a Republican senator is...
So that's not what I mean. I'm just saying they think that's going to tilt the scales so much that I'm not saying DC is going to turn red. I'm just
I see what you're
saying
saying.
Republicans are going to moderate to make sure they can recapture Texas and, that they don't lose Texas and don't lose all these other states.
I see what you're saying.
But just as a general political ideology, you have to moderate to survive, or you have to change. And it's the story of evolution. If you don't evolve, you die. So
you have to evolve in order to survive.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So if what we've kind of hopefully laid the groundwork so far, in my mind, I'm still sitting here thinking, I'm like, okay, have we threaded this needle, or are we like way off in the rhubarb here? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. But we've kind of tried to make the case that the left and the right, have a traditional understanding, and the way they exist right now probably doesn't fall within the framework of our traditional understanding, especially the current state of the left. Now, I do think that the right has changed in some ways. Like, again, for example, anyone who thinks that the right represents traditional American values, I think is probably, not completely with reality.
Close, but especially the fiscal responsibility, which is driven
the fiscal
so
responsibility,
much
that's
the other right.
Yeah.
Has completely just been abandoned.
Right. And so, like, the case that we're not making the case that the left is the only one that's morphed into something different. Okay. So that's not what we're saying. The right absolutely has as well. But if we say somewhere in the, let's say again in the 90s, so maybe 25, 30 years ago, the left gained ascendancy in the culture in terms of people's belief structures, what is the norm, what is the counterculture, what is considered cultural mainstream, that the left probably did that somewhere then. And the other part, and this is I'd kind of like to shift here a little bit, if that makes sense to you, to the switch that took place within the left. Because I think this is where the really interesting topic lies of, kind of unpacking. So it's not just about the left and the right changing hands, because that assumes that the left is a static thing and the right is a static thing, when really they're both dynamic. Like I just said, they both have shifted and morphed in a lot of ways, but the left has shifted in some ways that are very fundamental. In other words, I would argue that the right does not contain people with inherently contradictory and incompatible views, like as a general rule. And what I mean is, of course, I'm sure there are people that have incompatible views on the right. But the groups that hold those views, I don't think have any type of parity, or there's not any real tension. So in other words, I'm sure that there are super duper racists on the right who will probably vote for Donald Trump in November, but I don't see them as being a real threat to seizing the reins of the right generally and becoming the new thought leaders of the right. I'm sure there are lots of people on the left who would argue that that's crazy because we have a Nazi or whatever as president. But
the only thing I would say about the right, just real quick, is just because the left has moved leftward, has abandoned what we consider more independent ideologies like libertarianism that are now naturally moving into the right category. Same thing with classical liberals, naturally moving into the right category because conservatism is trying to conserve those ideologies. So there's some pushback. There's definitely some friction within the right, but I would say the overarching guiding principles are still intact there, where we all kind of follow. We're not going at the throat of libertarians just because they don't believe the exact same thing as conservatives do. And the biggest friction, I think, is the religious aspect, where there's a lot. I don't know. Again, it's not really a growing movement from the right, but it's just because people are starting to move toward the right that come from a more secular point of view. That is a lot of the friction, like kind of I alluded to, I think, before we started the recording. It's so much of our ideas are based in religion, and really you have to prove them through religion. Like the thought of murder is like something that you have to have religion in order to understand why murder is a bad thing. Where some people just completely abandon it. So there's a little bit of friction within the right. But the nice thing about the right is there's room for dissent. Like, we don't reject feedback. One, we can't really do it now. We want to try to accept some more ideas to grow the base, but there's a lot more dissent allowable in the right, where the left right now, there is no dissent. It's not allowed.
Would you say that the right has always allowed that dissent, or they've become more open to it? Okay. Yeah, that's, I think
well,
so.
as we talked about in the 90s, I mean, they wouldn't be accepting libertarians. Those dirty hippies wouldn't be allowed in the church, right? So they wouldn't be allowed. So there's always a pendulum shift. And although my very, very biased opinion, I would say the right has always seemed to be a little bit more open than the left has been throughout history, at least more consistently. The right has had its problems, for sure, with not allowing dissent. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So that's good. So the point is that there has been, let's talk a little bit about the change as we see it that's taken place within the left. And I want to try and, there's so many, you can listen to Sam Harris or Dave Rubin or any number of PragerU videos or any of these things, people talking about, the left. And so I'd like to try and take an approach that's as almost academic as possible without putting any value judgments on it, just to try and present the information to try and build the case. Now, obviously we can build in some of those, what are our personal thoughts on this whenever we go to analyze it. But if we're just to try and take almost a sanitized, just overlooking view of what happened within the left, what are the competing ideas, and how did one set of ideas maybe subsume the other set? I want to hear your thoughts on that first, like as in when you think that happened, how you think that happened, and what exactly that is. And then I can kind of build on that, because this is the part that is so important to the case that we're making. So just so everyone who's watching this or listening to this, if you're still with us, the point is that we have a pretty good understanding of kind of where the right is right now with Trumpism and this kind of populism. And I wouldn't say there's anyone that necessarily loves where it's at, but it's out there in the open. Like we understand that Donald Trump and Ted Cruz are very different. That Dan Crenshaw and Donald Trump are very different. So there are competing tactics on the right. So you got your Candace Owens, a little bit more, and then again you have some people that are a little bit more thoughtful about it, like Dan Crenshaw or something like that. And I'm just presenting them as thought leaders. I know Candace Owens isn't a politician, so of course Dan Crenshaw is going to be a little bit.
I would argue the thought leaders are very rarely politicians. They're going to be the people commentating on the politicians.
Yeah. No, that's fair. And so, but my point is that we kind of understand where the right is, even if it's where it is in a little bit of a disarray, because it doesn't really know what it believes about spending. It's like you said, there's a lot of people coming into the right, so it's still figuring out. I think it's in a lot of the areas where it's still figuring out what it is. It's just kind of just left them alone. So like same-sex marriage, for example, instead of trying to figure that out, they just said, okay, whatever, we're just going to not talk about it anymore. I think would be another example, but that's out in the open. The kind of the differences in the right are out in the open, and not that the differences in the left aren't out in the open, but I don't think they're out in the open in a way that people really understand what's at stake. Like really understand how incompatible these different ideologies really, really are. And I think there's also a little bit of a sanguine, almost disarmed kind of thing where people see the fact that Joe Biden is the nominee and Kamala Harris is, his VP pick. And they think, oh, that means that we Bernie didn't win, Hillary got the nomination, and now it's Biden. So the moderate Democrats, we've, whatever this other thing is, like we've beaten it. We've been able to keep the progressive ideas at bay. And I don't think that's the case. So if you were to kind of give, your understanding of the two different competing ideas within the left, and kind of where they were, and then maybe how one of them started to overtake the other one, just kind of what exactly is going on over there, so that we understand that if the left generally gained the reins of culture, who gained the reins of the left and is now actually steering that culture. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think what we need to start out is really what caused the shift. And to me, there are three different options here. Um, did this shift come from within the left? Is option number one. Option number two is this an external force that came into the left and then made that shift? And then option number three is this just a natural progression of liberalism or progressivism? And I think, as you kind of alluded to before, I think we both think it's option three, at least the most influence on is just a natural progression of progressivism. And then I would also say a little bit of the external force, and I think that comes a bit from critical theory and stuff like that, and we can dive more into that later. But kind of the natural progression of especially progressivism, and I throw liberalism in there. Again, we have different definitions of liberalism depending on what context you're bringing to the conversation. There's classical liberalism, and then what I would consider now is basically progressive liberalism. And what I would say progressive liberalism is more of an absolute liberalism. So if you want to build a mirror image of what absolute liberalism is on the left compared to what it is on the right, I think a good example on the right would be the Ayn Randian type of free market advocates. So there's this idea that the free market builds its own moral systems. And that's not something I would agree with, although I think that's an idea that I would have played around with more, in like 2015, like a while ago. And again, the almost
utilitarian morality,
exactly.
Basically. Yep.
Right. And we know, we know that doesn't work, that people can be taken advantage of, and there needs to be a moral system that free market economics works within. And I think we see this most glaringly with China. Like you can't utilize a system that's not playing the same game in order to drive down the price of goods and increase purchasing power. It doesn't work that way. But the idea of absolute liberalism is tolerating really bad behavior. So an example of this, I'm going to try to tread lightly because my fiance, I don't think, listens to the show very much, but there's a situation where we have a friend who is dating a guy, and we found out that the guy she's dating is married with children. And, we see this as a big moral conflict, right?
Sure.
But just to get out of that, what she tells me, my fiance tells me, is like, should I say anything? Like, is this my place to say, hey, maybe we're kind of uncomfortable with some of the stuff you're doing because, we find it more immoral? Or do I just say I don't judge? Like, I'm not going to judge a situation. And to me, that is the ideology of absolute liberalism, is to not judge. It's the person that says, only God can judge me, and they tattoo that on their lower back, and they've never cracked open a Bible before. It's like,
yep.
Yeah, I don't think you understand the point of judgment, especially in a biblical context where I'm not going to be the person making your final judgment. I'm not condemning you to hell, but I can judge you as a person to say, hey, what you're doing is wrong, and you're going to hurt people. And so, again, it comes back to her saying, well, I don't want to judge. And what that effectively does is it normalizes bad behavior. And that is what we saw within the left. The absolute liberalism to say, you know what, there's a competing ideology within the left. I want to be sensitive to it. I don't want to say, I'm shutting you down because you don't believe exactly the way I do, because we've seen what happened in the 90s with the religious right. And I don't want to look like that. I want to be accepting of and be open toward these alternative ideologies. And the result of that was to see the ideology over there. You look down at something, you look down at your phone, you look up, the ideology is right in your face now. And it is starting to take over your surroundings. And that's what happened. You have one ideology that says, I'm not going to judge. And you have the other ideology that says, I'm taking over everything and I'm shutting down dissent. And I think that's where you saw the flip there, is just, again, absolute liberalism took over, and this new ideology of progressivism took over the party, or took over the ideology, I should say, the ideology of the left. And, it comes from a place of not judgment. And my response to my fiance is, I think the world would be a much better place if we judged each other more critically. It's not judging each other is not a good way to live. You're going to accept a lot of bad ideas, and you're going to see a lot of bad things happen if you decide to do that. And, that's what I think catalyzed that switch within the left. And now you have someone else driving the bus, and those people do not allow dissent, and they present themselves as open, but are the most closed people you can possibly imagine. I mean, you say you're open to, the LGBT plus alphabet people community. And I don't mean that to be like demeaning, but we're grouping all these very, very diverse people into this one large group. It's like people of color. It's like you can't lump a huge diverse group like that and expect them to all believe in the same thing.
Right.
And now you say, I'm for I absolutely advocate for these people. And then one person from that group dissents and is like, I don't know. I don't really believe in the stuff. I'm a lesbian and I believe in feminism, but now we're in direct conflict when it comes to allowing some of these transitioned men that transition to women do go into female spaces and starting to exclude the females. It's like, to me, that is going against my brand of feminism. And with that type of dissent, even though they're within that community, it is not allowed. They'll be booted out. And same thing with Black Americans. If a Black American goes against something like BLM, they get called the worst things in the book by the same people who advocate for their rights. So I think that's what we've seen in the left with the switch.
I'm going to use the whiteboard. How's that? Can I do that? You cool with it? All right. Can you still hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay. Brett Weinstein drew a picture with his wife Heather yesterday, and I think I have I think it could be useful to us. I have a way that I would change it a little bit to kind of give a visual representation of what we're talking about here. So what he did was he said, we traditionally kind of understand, so this is an L, this is an R, and things traditionally kind of vacillate in here, right? And anytime, if this ball, and that's where Heather said, the far end of left is, Marxism, far end of right is fascism. So if this goes up and over, you end up in basically the same place. That if you manage to kind of go to the far extreme and go downhill of either side of these ideologies, then you're in a bad place, right? So what I would add to kind of maybe for our purposes here is a hierarchy of ideas on each side. And what we're talking about is, so if this hierarchy represents the driving idea sets in either one of these groups, what we're really talking about is, has this hierarchy of, we're operating here, we've kind of talked about here that fiscal responsibility is not, maybe it was up here and now it's actually down here, right? Mm-hmm. So that's not a big, value, right, anymore.
Well, it's projected as a big value, but it is,
but in practice,
right.
In practice, it's not, right? So the question is, are these ideas, is everything within these ideas on the left compatible? If not, which ideas are in there? Like, what are the top ascendant ideas of the left, and are they the same as what we've maybe always understood them? Because what you're talking about,
current day left,
right? Yeah, because that's what we're talking about is that so within the right there are certain so we could say family values is something that changed, right? So quote unquote family values. Really, I would say that the ascendant idea on the right now in my view is really hold the line of the Constitution and individual rights and freedom. That seems to be the ascendant value on the right. Would you say that is roughly correct?
I mean, I would put family values probably more toward the middle. I do think Trump is a bad vessel for family values, obviously, but family values is still, I think, pretty high in the relative hierarchy of the right.
Where do you see that? Because I can't even think of an example of where I would see that.
Advocation for the nuclear family, having 2-parent households is a huge one. I mean, that's a massive talking point for the right.
2-parent household. Okay. That's fair. That's fair. I think.
And also if you include abortion in there, I don't know where you'd fit abortion categorically. But if you'd fit it in family values, then obviously it's also toward the top.
No, I think that's probably right too. But even so, that would be the abortion one is basically the one place where there is this conservative value of, because right now there's such a push coming from the left against individual rights and liberty. The one place where the right is saying, no, we do want to impose, a quote unquote restriction on your liberty is because of, what they call an externality with abortion. It's not trying to control your body. It's about the body inside of your body. So that's fair. But we'll say the Constitution, so we'll just put liberty. I'm just going to put an L for liberty. So on the left, the point is, and what we're trying to get at here is that, the example that I just want to I'm just going to jump to the Hydra analogy because I don't know a better way to articulate it. Is that we have in the movie Captain America, right? So we have the Captain America, the first Avenger, and they're fighting in World War II, and within the Third Reich. So I hate using the left as our kind of our nut, but within the Third Reich so you have the overarching hierarchy of power and resources of the Nazis, but there's this other subgroup within there called Hydra, and Hydra has a different set of goals. They have a different worldview. They have a different plan for the world, but they're totally fine using the resources of the German government and military until they gain enough power to put their plans into motion, in which case, at the end, there's kind of that quote whenever one of the Nazi scientists sees that the map of where Hydra's going to, bomb everywhere, that Berlin's on the map. And he says, the Nazi guy is like, but Berlin's on here. And what's his name? Red Skull says, yes, all of Hydra's enemies are going to be taken out. And that includes the Third Reich. We've outgrown you, basically. And the point is that they had no problem, Hydra had no problem using their resources, using the power, using the safety of kind of being within this larger structure until they were able to seize the reins and just push everyone out and completely take over. And that was kind of the goal there. And the argument that I would make, and I think that we are making, is that there is kind of a similar shift within the left. So the right can shift these things around a little bit, but I wouldn't say there's any group in the right that has any type of real power, that has a fundamentally different ideology, fundamentally incompatible ideology to the right generally. I'm not saying they don't exist, but that they don't have any real power. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So the equivalent would be like if Hydra was just two guys sitting in a room talking about how they wished things were different, but they still were kind of, yeah, we'll vote Nazi, I guess. As opposed to being strong enough to completely take over the structure. And so on the left, what we're talking about here is, and this is where you said, this really the differences between a classical liberal, people that are just a little bit more open to things, maybe want, more of a social safety net, probably some more government intervention in, the environment, higher taxes, that kind of thing, versus an entirely different idea set, that is completely incompatible with, the way that the kind of the classical liberals on the left would attain their goals. So like you get an anti-capitalism vibe going on there. Like capitalism and we hate capitalism are completely incompatible, right? Like it's not reform capitalism. It's we have to dismantle capitalism.
Well, one wants to fix the free market a bit more compared to the complete fix, to a complete fixed market is how I put that in economic terms, right?
Yep. So my point is that the people who are kind of always in charge at the top of the hierarchy up here paid enough lip service to, kind of their radicals down here that they allowed the radicals to spread. So the radicals maybe only had this corner, and then they got this corner, and then they got this much, and this much, and this much. And now they're completely taking over the hierarchy. It'd be the same as if the right, talked about, well, we don't want to completely bring back, slavery, or we don't want to completely create a white ethno state, but we could probably dabble in it, right? That's where you get, the kind of the lip service that the left is paid to socialized medicine or some of these other crazy left-wing ideas, that the progressivists put forth. They don't really condemn them. They just say, well, we'll kind of play around with that a little bit. And so by allowing radical ideology to spread within their midst, they let Hydra take over. They let Hydra take over their party. And so the left, who's kind of generally controlled the culture or been, the dominant, thought leaders, perceived moral betters, probably since the 90s, has since then, I think, I would say, probably sometime in 2010s, been taken over by, that group within them, that it has completely incompatible views and is now steering the ship. So I don't know what your thoughts are. We could bring up that article that kind of explains it from January if you wanted.
Yeah, I would say the one, I know we explained it in more economic terms here, but I think the biggest divergence inside of the left right now, and the most ground ceded by the classical liberals to the now more progressive liberals, is they used to be, the classical liberals were about equality or proportionate opportunity, and they ceded ground to equity or proportionate outcome. These two things seem synonymous with each other, but they are completely at odds.
They're incompatible.
You can't have both. So the equality of opportunity, which is a worthwhile goal, at least allowing every person to have the same general opportunity. And even as someone on the right, I would say you really can't attain that. You can't, if my parents decided to work hard, stay together, and gave me a leg up by being, accumulating enough wealth to send me to a better school or whatever, obviously my opportunity is going to be a bit higher than someone born with a little less privilege in that case. So there are still ways that pure equality is not really attainable, but at least you can get rid of the roadblocks to some of the opportunity for everyone. Like, you can't obviously get rid of any legislation that does not allow opportunity for everyone. But now that has shifted to equity. Equity is the big word. And this is something like when you're reading through some of these books like White Fragility and How to Be an Anti-Racist. This is the word flip that they did in there. And people, because they're so close to meaning, and even equality, I could switch that out in a normal conversation. People aren't even going to notice I did that, right? Because they're so close to each other. But their meanings and really the ways to achieve those goals completely different, not compatible at all. And so that is kind of the slip that they did. And I want to say they started to really brand themselves as an equity movement instead of equality movement, and probably like more than 90s, but then more overtly in like the 2012 to 2014 range. And that is where you see complete divergence within the party. And now even politicians on the left are ceding ground to equity. And although equality of outcome is more of a dirty term, because it's more obviously like, okay, you can't do that. You can't legislate equality of outcome. Equity seems to be a softer version of the exact same goal.
Yep. It's just the same thing, just stated differently. That's right. So what we're talking about here is, because this whole thing, we've been building and set up the conversation about hierarchies becoming corrupted. How do we know when a hierarchy has become corrupted? And, we've kind of framed this as we want to give the contemporary of kind of, okay, how does this relate to today? And we've really just, we've spent an hour kind of laying the groundwork of what happened and where we are today. And what we're saying is that the people who control the culture are the ones who, kind of brand themselves as a counterculture, the one who say they want to dismantle, systems of or positions of power, are the ones in power. And they come from, like, if you say, well, that's just, this is just the Democrat, it's the normal back and forth, it's the normal ebb and flow. No, the ones who have taken over here are wanting to completely change the rules. They want to completely hermetically seal them. So they're taking the reins of power within the left and within the culture, and they want to cut themselves off. And what they put forth is incompatible with the rest of the left and everyone else more broadly. And they're very open about this. Do you care if I bring up that article?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So what we're talking about here is, so here's an example. So this is an article from January. So can you see it?
Yep.
All right. So this publication, Jacobin, is it's a Marxist socialist publication, and this is from January 7th, and they're talking about this AOC quote where she had said, that basically that her and Joe Biden would not be in the same party if they were in another country. And so they say AOC is right. She, Bernie Sanders, and the millions of working class people ready to fight for a political revolution don't belong in the same party as Joe Biden. The fact that they're nevertheless Democrats is one of the more frustrating facts of American politics. And this article is, they're saying, what is it that you see in the news? You hear people on the left and right say the quiet part out loud. The quiet part is that it's just convenient. This is Hydra. It's convenient for them to be in the same party here because they have to have a political home, but they are not compatible, like thought structures. They're not compatible visions of government. They're not compatible visions of rights and of liberty. They are not compatible. And so this is what they kind of give people, being pissed off at her about, and they say, why don't you join another party? And, if we're on the same team. And what Jacobin says here is, but are we really on the same team? The political distance between AOC and Bernie Sanders on the one hand, Joe Biden on the other, is stunning. They're not on the same team when it comes to their vision for America. And thank God for that. Medicare for all. AOC and Sanders believe healthcare is a human right. It should be granted to everyone. Biden disagrees. He wants single payer. On the environment, AOC and Sanders back a multi-trillion-dollar Green New Deal that will transform our economy, pushing us rapidly towards 100% renewable energy to avert the worst effects of climate change. On the other hand, as the Sunrise Movement details extensively, Biden's plan fails almost every regard to measure up to the moment. Mass incarceration. Biden built his career pushing Ronald Reagan from the right to create it. Social Security, abortion rights, on war, so on and so forth. So it says that they're not candidates running on the same agenda or cut from the same cloth. AOC and Sanders and other Democratic socialists run their campaigns exclusively through the support of working class volunteers and contributors. Meanwhile, Biden, Buttigieg, Klobuchar, every other Democrat run campaigns bankrolled by Wall Street and other big money donors managed by mercenary consultants.
Love that term, mercenary consultants.
Right. And so the point is that we're not the ones saying that they have incompatible visions, that the left currently holds people who are vying for power that have incompatible visions. The left says that they have incompatible visions. And it's the far left progressives, the one who we're arguing have taken control, that they're open and honest about it. They're saying, look, we do not have the same vision for America. We don't have the same vision for government. We don't have the same vision for rights. We don't have the same vision for any of these things. And what do they say? They say, thank God for that, because they view anyone to the right of them as kind of the enemy of the revolution. And it's the Joe Bidens and the Nancy Pelosi's that aren't at least honest about it, because they want their vote. That's what I'm saying, is they've paid enough lip service to the radicals in their midst because they want their votes, and it's made the radicals spread and gain ascendancy in a way that where they now need their votes. Whereas if they would have just early on said, nope, sorry, they're going to vote for him anyway. The same way that the white nationalist, racist, super far right, they're still going to vote Republican, even though the right is like, dude, we're not we're never going to do that. I mean, thank you for your vote, but we're never going to do that, right? You know, if the left would have said, yeah, hey, we're not going to have a revolution. Sorry. We still love your vote, but no, we're not going to implement this Marxist revolution. I mean, what's crazy here is they talk about on the environment, AOC and Sanders back a multi-trillion-dollar Green New Deal that will transform our economy. You know, that's one of the things that I think it's Scott Adams who says, this is how you know that the Green New Deal and, you know, all the rhetoric about climate change isn't actually about climate change, because they talk about how it's going to create this amazing new inclusive economy. Whereas
they talk about racial equity.
Exactly.
Inside, like stuff that's like,
they say,
what?
Well, they try to equate it to the war effort, you know, during World War II. And during World War II, they said, we're going to be rationing things. This is temporary. It's going to be hard. Like they did not try to present it as this is going to be some amazing thing. No, we're going to be rationing. We're going to be fighting this. And then we're going to get back to normal, business as usual. They didn't try to sell the war effort as this is going to be this big transformative thing for the economy. They said, no, this is going to suck for a while, but it's a necessary, we're going to be making necessary sacrifices for this effort. But they try to paint this as some utopian economic situation, shows you that it's not really about the climate. It's just, that's just one more way to package this set of ideas. But the point is that we're not the ones saying it. They're the ones saying it. And so they're not on the same team. They have a different vision for our country. They have a different vision for governance. They have a different vision for all of it, our rights and liberties, and so on and so forth. And so that's the new hierarchy on the left. The hierarchy of power, the people actually controlling the reins of power, are the progressives, the AOC, the Bernie Sanders, and so on and so forth. Yes, and to not acknowledge that is to not acknowledge that there's a bigger threat here to our way of life than I think maybe we are discussing.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think again the traditional vote Democrat, I think, is taking the path of absolute liberalism and kind of going along. And a very common theme I hear from some of my friends who are like even Bernie Sanders supporters. One, Bernie Sanders is attractive because he's honest in some capacity, right? He's more honest than your average politician. That's not saying much. It's not a super high bar, but you can tell he believes in the things he believes, and that's what attracts people. And you normally when you push him on like, oh, okay, what about policy things? It's like, well, no. And this is what they openly say on now the critical theory side, the kind of reparation sides. Like, no, we're demanding, or the defund the police side, that no, we're going to demand the defund the police as some sort of negotiation position that's super radical, and then we plan on moderating and just starting. So basically they're saying, you know, I'm going to buy this car. It's a $40,000 car, and I'm going to offer you $20,000 for it. And now I expect us to meet somewhere in the middle. You know, they're using it as a negotiation tactic. Mm-hmm. And, sorry, hit by a bug. And yeah, they're starting from this extremely radical base and claiming that, you know, they'll move more toward the middle. And then you have the people who are actually have the defund the police signs like, no, I think we should actually try eliminating the police, see how well that goes. And then, you know, we will change from there or whatever. So you have one side using it as a tactic to get in the door, and then once they're in the door, it's like, well, no, we want the whole Green New Deal. This is what we want, and all the things that come with it, and that's extremely dangerous. I mean, that's just it's a bad faith effort to try to achieve your goals, and if people actually saw that, if the everyday Democrat voter, again, my friend who's a Bernie fan that just says, oh, none of his stuff's going to get achieved, I just like him as a person. It's like you understand what you're allowing into the door. Again, you're normalizing an ideology you don't even agree with, but you're just doing it either to fight back against Trump or to say, I just like this guy because he seems more genuine. So you have these very, very radical policies that are trying to get their foot in the door, and they're able to convince the more everyday voter through the power of the institutions that they hold all this power in, that include the media, that will kind of shill for them and present their radical ideas as not that radical, or they'll paint the other side as, well, you have to go with these radical ideas because you don't want to go with those radical ideas,
Yep.
So it's very dishonest how they're portraying this.
Yes, and I'm not sure that everyone who's portraying it dishonestly actually understands that they're portraying it dishonestly. So what we've been kind of building is, okay, here's the case. Left and right traditionally go back and forth. The left probably gained ascendancy in the culture generally. So that's media, the just general values of the culture, probably somewhere maybe around 30 years ago. But then within the left, there's another group that took over them that is now steering the culture. And it's not the same left that we, normally associate it with. It is these radicals. It is this progressive base that's incompatible in their visions of really everything, including perceptions of reality. And as you mentioned, I think this is it's worth talking about a little bit of how they continue to have any legitimacy whatsoever with some of these insane ideas. And that is like what you just said, is that there's people that will kind of go out and shill for them, or that will go out and say, well, no, this is what they really mean by this. This is what this really means. And a lot of this, I think, is this tribalism, this partisanship, where people, once they start to encode what are the buzzwords of my side, then they just rush to defend whatever those are, without necessarily thinking about whether or not it's a good idea or not. And again, the defund the police was one that whenever it cropped up, I thought, I know what's going to happen. I had specific even people in mind that I know who I'm like, I'm interested to see how this person starts to, spontaneously defend this idea without engaging with it in any type of like kind of critical thinking kind of way. And they did just that. And they did, well, this is what it would look like. And here's all the ways in which this could work. And that kind of goes into the Mott and Bailey kind of thing. And that's one of the ways in which these radicals are able to continue to promulgate and have their ideas be granted legitimacy. That's James Lindsay's talked about this before. I've heard Ben Shapiro also kind of allude to it. But the Mott and the Bailey was this old style, basically a civilization, like a township in medieval Europe. And you'd have like this big superstructure called a motte on maybe the top of a hill that was a defensible position. And then the bailey is all around it. And that's kind of the farmland and the village and where the people actually live. And then if someone comes and attacks their bailey, they rush up into the motte, and they can defend their territory. And the argument that, again, we'll have to put a link there, that Lindsay makes, and that is what you were just talking about, is that the radicals will say something like defund the police, and they're out in the bailey. So the bailey is, defund the police. Let's get rid of the police, or we're going to replace them all with social workers, or the Green New Deal, or Black Lives Matter even is, and as an organization or anything like that. That's all out in the bailey, and they'll have these radical ideas. And then there are people who key into, well, this is our side. They build the motte. They build the defensive, the more reasonable position, which is, I'm against police brutality. That's the motte. That is the defensible position. Or, racism is bad, or, or any type of
Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, or Black Lives Matter. Yeah, like what's the problem? And so they play around in the bailey and they push all these crazy policies. And then the people who say they can't possibly mean that literally, or this is our side, so let's find a way to make it work, build the defensive position so that whenever someone goes and attacks them and says, what do you mean defund the police? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. They rush back up into the motte And they say, well, what do you mean? Why don't you want to reform the police so that we don't have police brutality? Why don't you want the police to have more training? And so they let people build their defensible position for them, and then they're able to sufficiently push back any criticisms, and then they go back out and play in the Bailey and push all these radical policies and ideas. And I think a lot of the times the people that are building the MOT for them are building the defensible positions don't realize what they're doing. They don't realize, like, they buy into the bait and switch of the language, like you were alluding to earlier with the equity and equality stuff. And they want to, give it the principle of charity as much as possible and say, well, what's the reasonable version of what I think you're saying? And they defend that, but really, and then the people who really are like, no, I really mean this. I think there was an opinion piece a couple months ago in the New York Times that said, no, we really mean defund the police. No, this is what we really mean. And there were lots of people in that same vein saying that, like, no, we really mean this. Like, I understand there are people trying to steelman this. No, this is what we really mean. But that, of course, that doesn't get any coverage or attention. Dismantle the system. We really mean that. We really mean we're going to tear down this whole thing and implement an entirely new structure here.
And that's what you get when the calls for revolution is always where I stop. I'm like, okay, what brand of revolution? American Revolution or French Revolution? Dismantle is French Revolution.
Yep.
That's accompanied by a lot of different things you're probably not going to like, which includes a lot of death and a lot of destruction. And that's just the natural conclusion of that type of revolution. And dismantling perfectly, I mean, you let the cat out of the bag there, exactly what your plans are and what lives are going to be destroyed because of this major shift and major change. And I think that's an important thing that we don't call out. We don't do a good job of calling out. Especially the revolution is a big red flag to me when anyone calls for revolution. Maybe it's my conservative tendencies to always push back against revolution, although there are certainly great cases, American Revolution being one of them, of the good they can do if done properly. But the proper word is going to be reform. The proper word is going to be, let's look at what's wrong with these systems and try to correct them. And there's an interesting tweet that Michael Knowles sent out about you're reforming systematic racism. And then he lists out all the institutions that are controlled by the left and being like, well, if there's systemic racism or systemic injustice in these systems, maybe stop voting for all the people who control the systems.
Right.
I mean, you're just constantly just continuing the cycle by just making sure you can keep those people in power and keep those ideas in power more relevant than the actual people themselves. It's the ideas.
Yep. So, all right. So I feel a little bit more on track here. I think the first hour I'm like, oh my God, this is.
Yeah, we went off the rails a little bit. I mean, there was some good content in there, but we didn't stick on the left hierarchies much.
Well, it's really difficult. I mean, this is people have a difficult time understanding that the left is not the left as I understand it. And that, whenever they say the systems of power, we have to, challenge those in positions of power. They're the ones in power. They're the ones who've been in power. And so, like, the left has been in power for a while in terms of controlling the culture. And the fact that they've allowed these radicals in their midst to continue to be legitimized in their most pathological forms, that part of the left has gained power. So there's been two shifts. And this whole thing, what we're talking about is hierarchies becoming corrupt. And the left, and not the left generally, we're talking about this subgroup. We're talking about Hydra here. They have taken over the positions of power within the left, and they're taking over positions of power within our institutions, education, news media, so on, entertainment, just corporations generally. And because they have that different vision, that's why it's important to note, like, whenever AOC says, yeah, we don't belong in the same, we want this big structural change, we want this big revolutionary change. What does that mean? Like you said, I want to know, is it French Revolution or American Revolution? Is it dismantle or is it reform? they want to dismantle, they want French Revolution style thing. They're already seizing the reins. They have the hierarchy and it's becoming corrupted because they're changing the rules of the game, because they're forcing out dissent, because they're shaming, silencing, and censoring anyone who would try to give input into that hierarchy. And it's a difficult idea to present to people because they just see it as, oh, it's just cancel culture. I mean, that's what freaking happened at Evergreen whenever they, and for, a couple of years ago, they said, oh, this is all just on college campuses. No, it's not. That's what the Harper's letter was, as much as it was a CYA in some ways for some of those folks. But no, it's not. It's not just on college campuses. It's not just a few loud folks. It's, we only, the average person who lives on a low information diet and just wants to live their life only pays attention to it when it gets loud. Okay. They only pay attention to it whenever it's kind of in the news and there's the big cities are burning and things like that. And whenever there's the latest Twitter mob. And then they think that whenever there's no noise, that nothing is happening. But what happens every time there's this big surge in noise, there's this big spike in these ideas, defund the police, all this other stuff, that it quiets down a little bit, but policy's still happening. It's still going forward. And so that's where we're seeing these cities, a lot of them have just passed massive cuts to their funding for their police forces. And what's going to happen is that people are going to die. Things are going to happen. But the average person who is just trying to, live their life isn't going to necessarily realize that's taking place or the way these things are infiltrating our education system. Anyone who is even remotely concerned about what's going on in education should go and watch James Lindsay's new video, 2 + 2 = 4, to explain why this Twitter thing, and Shapiro kind of talked about it a little bit last week of, 2 + 2 = 5 and take back math. It seems like this silly kind of thing isn't just some silly kind of thing. It is a radical ideology that's trying to infiltrate math and say that regular math as we understand it is white supremacist. And that's something that you have to take seriously because they're gaining power whether or not we take it seriously. And they're gaining power in mathematics, they're gaining power in the media. That's why these ideas get the type of legitimacy that they're given. That's why Barry Weiss left the New York Times. Because just because it's not loud, just because the city's not on fire, doesn't mean that these ideas aren't still progressing. They aren't still gaining more and more footholds in our culture and in our institutions more generally. They're gaining power, they're gaining authority. And as we've said before, power is only a problem by extension of how it's wielded and who is wielding it. And so there's a hierarchy shift on the left, and then there's a whole nother hierarchy shift within the left. And the people that are in control now aren't who we think they are. They really mean what they say, and they really do have incompatible visions as the rest of us. And so I know that was kind of a little bit of a rant, but my point is this.
And there's something I can add to that too, but hit your last point.
Yeah. No, my point is that, that whole first, but we're trying to build this case because people have to understand. They have to understand. And so, we can take a while to get there, but people need to realize they kind of have to have all that context so that they know we're not joking around here. This is all fact. This is all based in reality. Anyway, go on and say you're sorry.
Yeah. So we started out the conversation by talking about, what did the right do this? Did they allow this type of intrusion into the base of the right? And I said there's a small window where the alt-right kind of came in. They're loosely defined. Some people were throwing out these ideas that could be, used in a racial way. And then they outright came out. It's like, oh yeah, I'm not a white supremacist. I'm a white nationalist. It's different.
Yeah, right.
This is where I would say you've now took the mask and you can now see the true believer, someone who I would call the true believer. And I consider Bernie Sanders a true believer, and for the same reasons you stated. But what happened on the right is they took the mask off. They said now the true believer became comfortable enough within this subculture to come out and expose themselves and say, hey, I'm a white nationalist. I just want a country for white people. It's, they kind of try to make it seem like nothing against black people. I just don't want them here, which is not a great argument. And it's awful. And immediately the mass of the right is like, okay, alt-right, now we've identified who you are. and now we're shoving you out the door. Your ideas are no longer acceptable within our ideology. So you can call yourselves alternatives to the right, but do not call yourselves right wing. Do not call yourselves Republicans. Do not claim you're a conservative, because you're not. And now what you're talking about here that happened on Twitter is the true believers are comfortable enough within the subculture of the left to expose themselves and say, here are my true beliefs. And again, the Bernie Sanders is a guy I've told you before. I think he thinks 2 + 2 = 5 because that is what he's demanded to believe from his ideology. That is what he must believe. And now you're seeing this mass movement, although it's silly, it's a silly Twitter thing. Your average politician, if Joe Biden, well, I shouldn't say Joe Biden would be super confused and whatever. Ask Kamala Harris about, the thing. She's like, oh, they're probably just trying to make a statement and they didn't literally mean 2 + 2 = 5 or whatever. But, do you see the left pushing back on these true believers the same way the right did immediately when they said, okay, we're a white national now mask is off. This is what I am. The right immediately like, no, get out of here. You're gone. There's even that one guy in Iowa who said some dumb stuff and immediately they tossed him out and primaried him. I forgot his name. But the left, they're not doing that. They're not saying, okay, true believers, we see who you are now, get out. Defund the police, people who are like, come out and like, no, I literally mean defund the police. They're not getting shoved out. They're like, well, maybe we should hear them out. Maybe, I believe it's the Camden model who defunded their police force. I believe it's Camden, right?
Yes.
If you remember who they are.
Yeah.
And, they said they defunded their police, which they did, but then they brought in the state police and their actually police representation increased from there. And what you're seeing now in like Portland, like I just saw an article that it was yesterday, the state police are now pulling out of Portland. And now you defund the Portland police. I believe it's Portland. It could be Portland or Seattle. It actually might be Seattle. But you pull out and you defund their police. You now have an absence of a police force. It's not there. And the people who are going to be hurt are the people in that area who own businesses, they're even giving out guidelines like don't walk around with your purse. If someone comes up to you and tries to get something, just give it to them and we'll send a social worker your way and make sure you can work through your emotional problems as a way to combat this rather than actually combating the crime itself. Yeah. And this is the natural progression. This is the French style revolution that we're starting to see in small bits and pieces in progressive cities, but will come at a massive level if we allow this ideology to remain corrupted. And now you're seeing the rigidity and solidifying of this corrupt ideology on the left. And, me on the right, I can fight against it, but it's going to be up to the people on the left to reject it and start to tear down that hierarchy and to build their classical liberalism back up.
Yeah, they have to delegitimize it. That's I think that example you gave about the alt-right is pretty good, because the equivalent would be if the right said, well, what they really mean by white nationalists is, they're saying that, white is just kind of like a blank slate of like a whiteboard. And so they mean a nation that you can kind of draw any picture on. So it
whiteness.
Can really be anything.
We could claim it to be whiteness, which again is an acceptable ideology when you mirror image it to blackness. So
seriously. And so what they really mean is that, but what you're saying is, no, they didn't do that. They said, no, that's evil. That's racist. Instead of legitimizing it, whereas the left has been legitimizing these ideas really for probably close to 40 years now. Probably pretty close to 40 years is when the ideas of it first kind of were introduced in the early 80s. Anyway, so that's good. So let's kind of talk about, I think this would be a good time. Well, I had a thought that was kind of different than what we talked about the structure of this being. I think it'd be worthwhile, so we could go into the specifics of why this thing is dangerous and where we're seeing it, this ideology right now in our institutions being dangerous. Or we can talk about, because I think it's worthwhile to address okay, well, if everything you guys are saying is true, why is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris the nominees? Like, I think that's a valid question. Mm-hmm. So that's an idea or a thought I just had. we don't have to talk about that now, but I think that's worth talking about. So I don't know. I'll leave it up to you.
I tried to hit on that a bit earlier. It's the Democratic Party as a party platform trying to reform toward the middle, and the culture that supports that platform rejecting it. So, and again, this is something that you see when you normally go against an incumbent candidate. You normally reform to the middle, the Bill Clinton kind of thing, the George W. Bush kind of thing, even the Obama kind of thing. I think that's the party's attempt to do that, to capture more of the vote, but that is not a priority to the people driving the bus. And that's why I think it's kind of a unique dynamic that we're not used to seeing. You kind of saw it with Trump, with Trumpism overtaking conservatism in a little bit of way, and you're still seeing the effects now. Like I said, I'm part of that Facebook group that is a anti-Trump conservatism, which is just the bastion of stupidity, and people abandoning conservative principles just to attack Trump. But they make some valid points too. Like, I'm not gonna say it's all bad. The reason I'm in there is there's some like super smart people that keep me grounded as a person to make sure that I keep straight with my principles. But again, that movement with Kamala and Biden is a political movement, not the cultural movement or the hierarchy we're even talking about.
The distinction, I want to make sure that I understand what you're saying. So you're saying that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, whenever you say that's the party platform moderating and trying to move to the middle, I hear that and go, that's them trying to seem like they're moderating and moving to the middle, whereas they're not actually. That's they're trying to present the notion that they might be, but none of their rhetoric, none of their policy proposals, any of it actually is that. So is that what you're saying? Or so you're saying that, or are you saying they're actually moderating and moving to the middle? Like, I don't see Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as representative
He's not, but according to, other than a few people like Amy Klobuchar, who are on that Democratic platform or on the stage when you saw all the people trying to become the nominee, they're relatively toward the middle. Relatively, I'm not saying that they are the Clinton style Democrats. That's definitely not where they are. I think Hillary, although not a very encouraging figure, not an inspiring figure to most people, was very, very toward the middle relative to her party at the time, right? So I think they're, again, trying to capture. They're trying to project this non-Bernie vibe that's going to capture their base, and so they're trying to at least go toward the middle a little bit. I mean, I've spoke upon the confusion with the Kamala Harris pick that didn't really gain anything with Biden. She just filled out check boxes, and probably not something I'd be proud of if I were her. To be picked because of your skin color and your genitalia is probably not the most prideful, thing to be happy about when you're getting picked like that. But to me, it was trying to show that you are still the Democratic Party that cares about these more moderate things and are going to capture some of the base rather than the extreme progressive. I think they're banking on the extreme progressives to hate Trump so much they're going to vote for whatever is against him, and then they're going to capture some more independence with the especially Joe Biden is considered a moderate. He's considered about as middle ground as you can get to people who haven't really investigated his past policy ideas. So I think that's what they're trying to do as a political strategy.
All right. Yeah, let's flesh that out some other time. I have some thoughts there as well, but we don't have to go down that. Okay. So then let's kind of close it out with the ways in which this ideology, this kind of far left, kind of orthodoxy, progressive ideology has infiltrated our various hierarchies and has corrupted them. And think about how do we know that's happened? Like, what are the red flags that we see, and try to think about them objectively as as not necessarily like personal opinion, but something that we could say is observed phenomena that does meet the criteria of it's become corrupted, it's starting to serve its own interests. What are some of the red flags that you see within our institutions and within our hierarchies that have become corrupted that kind of raises your, brings you to kind of high alert here a little bit?
So I'd say that there are two main red flags, and one you illuminated quite well in the second part of our last conversation with the Rhode Island hospital, is cutting off communication or eliminating feedback. You can tell when, and you see this manifest a bit more in the political sphere by condemning all dissent, not allowing feedback into the system. That is when a hierarchy becomes corrupt, because a healthy hierarchy relies on feedback from bottom to top in order to basically kind of the lift all ships model, right? You want to improve everyone's life within the hierarchy, or people at the bottom are going to start to say, well, this doesn't benefit me. I'm exiting out, and I'm going to create another one to compete with this one, or I'm going to work to knock it down. So the best way to try to cut that off is to say, okay, your feedback, you can write a letter, send it in, but we're not guaranteeing we're reading the letter, or we're basically going to say, no, you have to conform to this belief, and if you don't, we're going to call you a racist Nazi. And that's about the worst thing you can call a person in the American context. It's a name or a description that should be reserved for truly evil people, but now we just flippantly say everything that doesn't result in perfect equity is now racist. So we kind of redefine the terms, and that gets to the second red flag, that if you're changing the rules to the game, a complete overhaul of the rules, and I think I've explained this before, as how rules come about. There's no such thing. You don't create a new game and just create arbitrary rules to the game. You start the game, and then you figure out the rules along the way that creates the most competitive balance within the game. So, we think about free market capitalism. That's been around for a long time, and now we can kind of refine the rules to the game to make sure that everyone's allowed to play. Because it's kind of the example of that Jordan Peterson brought, and I forgot if it was like hamsters or rats or something like that. They play a game, and the most dominant one allows the weaker one to win every so often, so the weaker one has some incentive to continue playing the game. Right.
Yep.
It's like it's best for everyone that people who might not be the most competent in some sort of competence hierarchy to still be able to play the game. So you want to be able to give them something of value and something of meaning to stay within the hierarchy. And when you start changing the rules, and some of the ways to change the rules is something like the Jim Crow South, by blatantly changing laws to reinforce the results of the hierarchy you want to be in, to maintain power. You can just objectively just go in and change policy, and that's something we've seen a lot in the past, but you normally don't see that happen right away, because it's too hard to pass, especially in a democratic system or a democratic republic that we have. That would be a tough thing to just say, okay, we're going to outlaw hate speech. We've been trying to do that for a while, but you get pushback because people understand the trade-off. So you have to do it in different ways, and one of the other ways to change the rules is the redefinition of words. Yep. Which is a big one. And if you want to learn more about that, read George Orwell's 1984. It does a great job. I also recommend reading the appendix at the end. I don't know if anyone out there is a big fan of reading the appendices at the end of books, or even reading through the notes, but I feel like I need to fully read a book. And that one, he goes through the literal rules of newspeak and the methodology of changing definitions. And actually, one of the biggest things they do by changing definitions isn't actually changing definitions. They actually reduce the amount of words in the dictionary. And by reducing the words, you start to change definitions automatically, right? You get rid of the word bad, because you can just say good and not good. Well, when you have good and bad, you have a spectrum of good to bad. You have good, kind of bad, bad. But when you go from good to not good, you have a binary. It's either good or not good. There's no nuance in between. And that's a way to change the definition of a word. And we see it a lot, something like racist and anti-racist. You see it in there. And that's just one of the ways you change the rules. So those are my two big red flags, basically cutting off communication or feedback and changing rules.
That was an amazing summary, Kevin. You should definitely do that as a clip that you upload, by the way, what you just said there. Red flags for corrupted hierarchies. Anyway, thought I just had. So whenever you're talking about the changing the definitions, I was thinking about The Road to Serfdom when Hayek writes about that. And so that's what I was looking up. So I agree. I want to read this little section from The Road to Serfdom. So this, for those that don't know, Road to Serfdom was written by F.A. Hayek in the 1940s. He wrote it before the end of World War II about the rise of socialism and Marxism. And he was seeing it in Great Britain coming to ascendancy. And, he's laying out the principles of why this is a really cancerous ideology and the way that it works. It's really good. I highly recommend it. But here's a section, and he writes about that exact idea. He says, the most effective way of making people accept the validity of the values they are to serve is to persuade them that they are really the same as those they have always held. So if you're trying to get them to, to serve whatever it is you're trying to get them to serve, the best way to do it is to convince them that your ideas are actually the same ones they've always had. And the most efficient technique to this end is to use the old words, but change their meaning. Few traits of totalitarian regimes are at the same time so confusing to the superficial observer and yet so characteristic of the whole intellectual climate as this complete perversion of language. The worst sufferer in this respect is the word liberty. It is a word used as freely in totalitarian states as elsewhere. Indeed, it could almost be said that whatever liberty as we know it has been destroyed, wherever liberty as we know has been destroyed, this has been done in the name of some new freedom promised to the people. Even among us, we have planners who promise us a collective freedom, which is as misleading as anything said by totalitarian politicians. Collective freedom is not the freedom of members of a society, but the unlimited freedom of the planner to do with the society that which he pleases. This is the confusion of freedom, which power carried to the extreme. It is not difficult to deprive the great majority of independent thought, but the minority who will retain an inclination to criticize must also be silenced. So we have both of those phenomena right here. Change the definition of words and prevent feedback. Public criticisms or even expressions of doubt must be suppressed because they tend to weaken support of the regime. As Sidney and Beatrice Webb report of the position in every Russian enterprise, whilst the work is in progress, any public expression of doubt that the plan will be successful is an act of disloyalty and even treachery because of its possible effect on the will and efforts of the rest of the staff. Control extends even to subjects which have seen no political significance. The theory of relativity, for instance, has been opposed as a Semitic attack on the foundations of Christian and Nordic physics. And because it's in conflict with the dialectic materialism and Marxist dogma. So another way of saying that is math is white supremacist, right? So it's an attack on people of color. Every activity must derive its justifications from conscious social purpose. There must be no spontaneous, unguided activity because it might produce results which cannot be foreseen and for which the plan does not provide. And I'll end it here. The principle extends even to games and amusements. I leave it to the reader to guess where it was that chess players were officially exhorted that we must finish once and for all with the neutrality of chess. We must condemn once and for all the formula of chess for the sake of chess. Perhaps the most alarming fact is that contempt for intellectual liberty is not a thing which arises only once the totalitarian system is established, but can be found everywhere among those who have embraced it as a collectivist faith. The worst oppression is condoned if it is committed in the name of socialism. Intolerance of opposing ideas is openly extolled. The tragedy of collectivist thought is that while it starts out to make reason supreme, it ends by destroying reason. So the point is, he's saying, like this, what this thing does, this collectivist ideology, which is what we're talking about here, it is a collectivist ideology, is that it perverts the language to tell people, no, you've always been in favor of these things. Don't you like equality? Don't you want to end oppression? Don't you want to dismantle racism? So people hear that as end racism. What they don't know that the person is talking about is, well, when I say racism, I'm talking about literally the entire system that you live in. And I see that whole thing as racist. So I want to dismantle the entire system and build up this new collectivist utopian ideology. And so they pervert the language, but then they also silence people, because anything, and what is really important there, that he doesn't just say opposing ideas have to be silenced. Doubt generally, and that's where you get to anti-racism and silences violence and all this other stuff, where they're expecting action and conformity regardless, because anything that even is perceived as doubt is going to be portrayed as complicity in this oppressive, capitalist, patriarchal, white, colonial, hegemonic system of white supremacy and oppression. And so that, like, they're going to make it where you don't even have room to express doubt. Like, there is no neutrality. And that's, again, where you get that it's not good enough to just be not racist. You have to be anti-racist, because anything other than that is complicity in the system. It's not good enough to just not have an opinion. You have to silence is violence. You have to articulate your thoughts. I watched an interview with Don Lemon where he was talking about his new podcast, Silence is Not an Option. And he goes into this whole thing about how people need to get out there and express their opinions. Like, they have to get out there and say what they think. And I'm like, does he really mean that? Does he mean everyone? Because his immediate following statement was about, like, it was assumed support for what I'm talking about. Express your opinions if you support what I'm talking about. So silence is not an option as long as what you're speaking is supportive of what I say here. So my point is that Hayek is writing about the same red flags that you articulated, and the same red flags that I totally agree is whenever the systems, the hierarchy starts to cut itself off from feedback, shows that it's not actually interested in the most efficient way of doing things. It's not actually interested in reform, basically. Like, you're not going to cut yourself off, or you're going to be open to feedback if you think that you have room for improvement. If you think that maybe you don't have it all figured out, if you respect the views of others, you're going to cut yourself off from feedback if you don't care about the views of others. And if you've already decided that how you are doing things is the right way to do things. So there's that. And then there's the changing the words, changing the definitions so you can change the rules to, whatever, one part, cutting yourself off from feedback takes care of one part of the population, right? It's the part of the population that would give you feedback. Changing the rules and changing the definitions of words takes care of the rest of the population. And it makes it to where they're going to agree to something that they might not necessarily realize what they're agreeing to, because you've changed the definition of the words. So, defund the police, it doesn't actually mean that. It means reform, and more training or something. Or, dismantle racism doesn't actually mean fight racism. It means dismantle this whole system and rebuild my idea of a perfect and virtuous system. So that I totally agree. Those are the red flags. I'm trying to think if there's any others. The one thing I would say is that it's not just it's open opposition to difference of opinion. It's not just cutting itself off from feedback and ignoring it. It's that there's consequences for feedback. It's that there's consequences for disagreement. There's always an implicit threat of what happens if you disagree, of what happens if you decide that you're going to try and speak into this and express any type of doubt. Does that make sense? So it's not just I'm neutral to your different opinions. It's that I'm openly antagonistic and in opposition to your opinions.
Yeah, and I think you hit on that with violence. And my favorite Thomas Sowell quote, you can make any claim true if you change the definition of just one word, really rings true here. And it is the racist versus anti-racist. And one of the big words you said here was violence as a key word, where violence we normally categorize as an explicit action, right? If I punch you in the face, that's me being violent. If I said someone ought to punch you in the face, it's not actually violence. It might be advocation for violence, but we wouldn't consider that a violent act by me, right? But because it can result in violence, we say words are violence now, right? Not because words can literally punch you in the face or hurt you physically, but because they can inspire people to do those things to you. So we consider, we cut the middleman off and we jump from words that advocate for violence to direct violence by you. So you can now say something that's saying your BLM kind of sucks. And they say, oh, that's violence against black people because now someone's going to hear that, they're going to think, oh, BLM does suck, and now that justifies me taking some sort of physical action against someone. So they're jumping it, and it's kind of it is a redefinition of the word, but they do the same thing with racism, where Ibram Kendi explains racism in his book How to Be an Anti-Racist as not you saying white people are better than black people, but it is you advocating for a policy that ends in racial inequities, right?
Yep.
So this is his way to, one, call things racist that are objectively not racist. Anyone who's had a basic statistics class understand that two groups that are extremely diverse are going to have disparities in their outcomes. It's just a statistical fact. This is going to happen. And he redefines it to not only justify calling things that are racist not racist, but also to advocate for discrimination. So there's a quote that I read during our last podcast. It's like, past discrimination makes it moral to advocate for present discrimination. Present discrimination makes it moral to advocate for future discrimination. It's like we advocate for discrimination. So as long as it starts to bring racial equity, not equality, equity. And I mean, there's some awful things you can do. And one of the last reviews of his chapter, I kind of explain, the difference. Like, what we want to do is raise all ships. And some ships are still going to be a bit higher than others, but as long as we're all moving upward, that's a good thing. Equity quickly learns the best way to equalize these ships is sink them to the bottom of the ocean.
Yep.
And now they're all at the bottom of the ocean equally. And every single ideology that especially takes over a government will learn this fact eventually. The best way to make everyone equal is to make everyone poor, because that's the easiest way to get there. You can't make everyone equally a billionaire, because that just is going to render the dollar useless. What you can do is tax the billionaires so they get down to the level of everyone else. And now the value they bring is no longer profitable, and they have less incentive to bring any value. So that's an important part of redefinition. And also in the cutoff communication part, this is something I don't know if it would fit in the cutoff of communication or fit kind of in its own red flag category, but revisionist history to me is cutting off communication from the past, or at least dissolving the lessons we've learned from the past and building up new lessons. And I don't know if we've already planned on this being the second segment of our podcast already, or if we're trying to build an intro to it, but I can kind of further explain some of the things I've learned from revisionist history or give an example of it.
Oh, no, I think that's a great idea, and one worth talking about because of the role that history plays in feedback. So I think that's totally a good thing to jump into.
All right, there it is. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Make sure to join the Return to Reason Locals community and show Truman some support. You can go to returntoreason.locals.com to support his Locals community, and you can also find him on ThinkSpot and YouTube by searching Return to Reason. And you can also find him on Twitter at MyMundaneMind. And as I said at the beginning of the show, I want to take a quick moment to share different ways you can help support this content. There are a few easy ways to do this. You can follow me on Twitter at ENG_politics. You can give me a follow on Parler at Engineering Politics. You can join the Facebook group named Engineering Politics, where I share and discuss content with the Facebook community. You can also subscribe to my video channel on YouTube under the channel name Engineering Politics, where you can find the video version of each podcast. I'm also active on ThinkSpot, which is a discourse-generating application that promotes intelligent and honest conversations while discouraging the trolling and nonsense found on most social media platforms. You can find all of my podcasts and videos on there as well. But the best way to interact with me, get the newest content, and support this podcast is the Engineering Politics Locals community. This is an amazing community that goes far beyond just a membership platform intermediary for creators. It allows followers of this content to get together and discuss the newest articles, podcasts, and videos all in one place. I strongly urge you to join the Engineering Politics Locals community at engineeringpolitics.locals.com. You can become a member for free, and now you can get a 3-month free trial when becoming a subscriber if you use promo code EPFREE. That's spelled EPFREE, no spaces. I would love to have your support with your subscription so this content can remain independent and keep growing. Monthly subscriptions to the Engineering Politics Locals community start as low as $2 per month. So I hope I can count on your support so I can start making higher quality podcasts and subscriber content like the bonus content at the end of most shows, and the new video series, the EP Zone, available only in the Engineering Politics Locals community with a subscription pass. I appreciate your consideration. Let's build a community together. Thanks for listening. This is the Engineering Politics Podcast. None of the persons, podcasts, books, or other references other than engineering politics used in this work directly reflect my ideas and or personal beliefs, nor should they be held accountable for anything said during this podcast. Thank you for listening.